The earth trembled under the march of countless feet, and the air shimmered with the heat of a summer sun over the plains of Boeotia. On the horizon, a vast army stretched as far as the eye could see, banners snapping in the wind, a rolling sea of warriors and horses, and the clamor of Persian drums announcing the culmination of Xerxes' ambition. Behind them lay the ashes of cities and the shattered remnants of once proud towns. Persia, the empire of 100 nations, the kingdom of rivers and deserts and riches beyond reckoning, had come to the gates of Greece, determined to conquer the lands that dared resist its might. Yet on the ridge above the plains, a smaller assembly moved with purpose, disciplined and resolute. They were Greeks, Spartans, Athenians, Corinthians, and other city-states who had heard the distant thunder of Persian conquest and had chosen to stand together rather than submit. Their numbers were dwarfed by the approaching tide, barely 38,000 men to confront an ocean of 300,000, but in their eyes burned the unyielding light of freedom, courage, and defiance. Months earlier, the Persian king Xerxes had launched his invasion, sweeping through Thessaly and across central Greece, leaving devastation in his wake. Cities burned, temples desecrated, and citizens slaughtered, yet the Greek spirit had not broken. Athens had fallen once, its Acropolis sacked, but it had survived in exile, its fleet still a spear of defiance striking at the Persian flanks. The Spartans, famed for their discipline and mastery of war, had endured before at Thermopylae, where King Leonidas and his 300 had faced the tide of Persia, and though they perished, they bought time for Greece to rally. By the time the Persian army moved south, the Greek city-states had convened at Plataea, near the border of Boeotia, a site of strategic importance and natural fortifications. They were not a single army in the modern sense. They were a coalition, a mosaic of city-states, each with its own customs, commanders, and egos, yet united by a common understanding. If they fell here, Greece itself would fall. The weight of history rested on their shoulders. The Greeks chose their ground carefully, for the terrain would be their ally. To the east, the Cithaeron Mountains offered shelter and defensive advantage. To the west, the plains stretched flat and exposed, tempting the Persians into a frontal assault. Plataea itself was a land of rivers and hills, streams that could hinder cavalry, wooded areas that could conceal infantry movements. The commanders debated, weighed their options, and ultimately positioned their forces in a tight, disciplined phalanx, each hoplite shoulder to shoulder, shields locked, spears bristling like a forest of iron. Behind them, lighter troops and archers prepared to harass, to probe, to slow the enemy. But the core of the defense was Spartan rigor and Athenian ingenuity, an unbroken wall of bronze and courage. The Persian army arrived in waves, their numbers a living storm. Infantrymen from the far reaches of the empire, cavalry bred in the deserts of Persia and the steppes beyond, archers from Anatolia and Phoenicia, all converged under the banners of Xerxes. Their confidence was absolute. They had crushed the Greeks at Thermopylae, had laid waste to Athens, and now they expected Plataea to be no different. Yet the Greeks had learned from their previous encounters. They had studied Persian tactics, known the reliance of the Persian army on mobility, on archery, on overwhelming numbers. They had trained to absorb these blows, to hold the line, and then strike with precision. Discipline would counter numbers, cohesion would counter chaos, steel would counter arrows. In the days leading up to the battle, skirmishes tested the patience of both sides. Greek scouts observed Persian camps, noting movements, supply lines, and the rhythm of their war machines. Persian commanders, confident in their numerical superiority, underestimated the resolve of the Greek coalition. Small clashes erupted along streams and hillocks, soldiers probing each other, testing reactions. Yet the Greeks did not falter. They held their positions, disciplined and silent, waiting for the decisive moment when the tide of war would finally break. The Persians, frustrated by the lack of decisive engagement, began to press forward, pushing for a direct confrontation. Xerxes sent emissaries, offering bribes, threatening annihilation, attempting to fracture the coalition through diplomacy. But Greek unity held firm. Freedom, it seemed, was not a commodity to be bought, and courage cannot be intimidated. As the sun rose on the day of battle, the plains of Plataea were bathed in golden light, yet a shadow of dread stretched long over the ground. The Greeks advanced in phalanx formation, their shields forming an impenetrable wall, their spears leveled at the approaching enemy. The Persians deployed in a vast crescent, intending to envelop the Greek lines, their cavalry positioned on the flanks to strike where resistance was weakest. It was a confrontation that history would remember, not only for the disparity of numbers, but for the audacity of the Greeks, who faced overwhelming odds with unshakable resolve. The earth itself seemed to hold its breath as the two armies approached, the air charged with anticipation. The cries of commanders echoing across the plains, and the clatter of armor and weapons ringing like a prelude to catastrophe. And then it began. Persian archers unleashed a storm of arrows, blackening the sky, seeking to disrupt the Greek formation. But the hoplites held firm, shields raised, moving as one organism, each soldier a link in an unbroken chain of steel. Arrows struck bronze and wood, bouncing harmlessly, and where they found gaps, disciplined counters fell upon exposed soldiers. The Persian cavalry charged, expecting to shatter the Greek flanks, but the terrain and preparation worked against them. Streams, ditches, and compacted earth slowed their momentum, giving Greek spearmen the advantage to strike with deadly precision. Each wave of Persian attack was met with unyielding resistance. Slowly, methodically, the Greek line began to push forward, inching into the heart of the Persian formation, a movement as unstoppable as it was deliberate. The clash of shields and the thunder of hooves shook the plains as the Greek phalanx met the Persian onslaught with unwavering determination. The battle was no longer a mere skirmish. It had become a maelstrom of chaos. Discipline against disorder, steel against speed, courage against hubris. The Persians had expected a quick victory, a rout of a smaller, inferior force. Instead, they found themselves entangled in a struggle that tested the limits of their discipline, their coordination, and their confidence. Their soldiers, accustomed to victory through numbers, now faced an enemy whose unity and resolve made every advance costly. Each faltering step brought them closer to the deadly spear points of the Greeks. Each pause an opportunity for the hoplites to drive forward, shields locking, spears thrusting with lethal precision. The Athenians, proud and resilient, held the center alongside the Spartans, their bronze armor glinting in the sun, faces set in grim determination. The Spartans, masters of the phalanx, moved with a terrifying synchronicity, their shields overlapping perfectly, their spears forming a bristling forest that the Persian cavalry could not penetrate. To the sides, smaller city-state contingents provided support, flanking units ready to reinforce wherever the pressure of the Persian tide threatened to break through. Greek commanders moved among their ranks, shouting orders, offering encouragement, ensuring that the formation held, that panic did not spread, that the discipline of the phalanx remained unbroken. The Persians attempted to exploit perceived weaknesses. Cavalry from the eastern provinces charged the Greek flanks repeatedly, aiming to envelop and collapse the line. Archers showered the Greeks with arrows, hoping that the sheer volume would scatter their formation. Light infantry tried to probe gaps, skirmishers darting forward only to be met with disciplined counterattacks. Yet the Greeks adapted quickly, using the terrain to their advantage. Streams and uneven ground disrupted cavalry charges, forcing the Persian horses to slow, stumble, and break formation. Hidden units of Greek hoplites and peltasts struck with sudden ferocity, taking advantage of every hesitation. What should have been an unstoppable Persian tide became a series of costly, fragmented attacks, each met with deadly precision. Hours passed in a brutal rhythm of attack and counterattack. The Persians, enormous in number, began to feel the strain of coordination. The weight of their multitude, once a source of strength, became a liability. Commanders struggled to control the sprawling army, messengers darting back and forth under fire, trying to realign forces that had become disorganized under relentless Greek resistance. The Greeks, smaller in number, relied on their cohesion. Their discipline turned the battlefield into a narrow corridor where Persian numerical superiority counted for little. Step by step, the Greek phalanx pressed forward, absorbing assaults and striking back with devastating effect. Slowly, a sense of inevitability began to creep into the battle. What had seemed impossible, the holding of the line against an army 8 times their size, was now beginning to tip in favor of the Greeks. Amidst the chaos, heroism emerged. Soldiers fought not only for victory, but for the memory of those who had fallen at Thermopylae, for the survival of their city-states, for the principle that no empire, no matter how vast, could subdue the spirit of free men fighting for their homeland. Names were shouted across the field, legends in the making. A Spartan commander rallying his men in the face of repeated cavalry charges, an Athenian hoplite turning back a flanking maneuver with a single well-timed spear thrust a contingent of Boeotians holding a hillock that should have fallen to overwhelming odds. These small acts of courage, multiplied across the battlefield, became the glue that held the Greek formation together, making them far more than the sum of their numbers. As the sun climbed higher, the tide of the battle began to change. Greek spears struck Persian infantry with brutal efficiency, breaking lines that had once seemed unassailable. The Persian cavalry, exhausted from repeated charges and unable to maintain cohesion on the uneven terrain, faltered, creating gaps that the hoplites exploited ruthlessly. Encirclements that Xerxes had planned for the Greeks were now collapsing on the Persians themselves. The vast army that had marched with such confidence now found itself unable to maneuver effectively, its mass working against it. Panic began to ripple through the Persian ranks, a deadly contagion in the chaos of battle. Soldiers who had once advanced with arrogance now faltered, commanders shouted in frustration, and the cohesion of the great Persian host began to unravel. The Greeks pressed the advantage with relentless determination. Each push, each step forward, created a cascade of pressure that the Persian formation could not absorb. The Athenians on the left, the Spartans on the right, and the combined contingents of other city-states in the center moved as a single organism, exploiting every weakness, every hesitation. The plain became a stage of carnage, where the discipline and courage of a relatively small army inflicted devastation on a force many times its size. Arrows fell uselessly on the shield wall, cavalry charges ended in broken lines, and the Persian soldiers began to retreat in confusion. The sight of retreating comrades only fueled the panic, spreading fear like wildfire. By late afternoon, the battle had turned decisively. The Persian army, once a tidal wave of power, now reeled under the unyielding pressure of Greek steel. The hoplites drove forward, breaking remaining resistance in pockets of combat, cutting down soldiers who attempted to flee. The once mighty formations dissolved into scattered bands, and the plains of Plataea became a scene of slaughter. Xerxes, watching from a distance, could only see his army crumble, the pride of an empire reduced to chaos before a determined coalition of free men. Greek soldiers pursued the fleeing enemy, ensuring that no regrouping could take place, leaving a scene of total victory that would echo through history. By late afternoon, the Persians were no longer an organized army, but a scattering multitude, their courage eroded, their lines shattered. What had begun as a proud invasion force now resembled a horde in retreat, panicked and disoriented, fleeing across the plains of Plataea. The Greeks, sensing the final moment of opportunity, pressed relentlessly. The phalanx, still disciplined and cohesive, advanced in unbroken formation, a wall of bronze and determination that left no room for escape. Spears struck wherever hesitation appeared. Shields deflected desperate counterattacks, and the ground shook under the relentless push of hoplites, determined to turn the tide of history in their favor. Victory, once a distant hope, now shimmered within reach. The Persian generals attempted to regroup their forces, shouting orders across the battlefield, waving banners to restore coherence. Yet their efforts were in vain. Communication had broken down, and the sheer chaos of the retreating mass rendered commands meaningless. Cavalry units that had once been a formidable threat now collided with fleeing infantry, creating a deadly pile-up. Soldiers stumbled over one another in confusion. Their discipline evaporated under the weight of panic. The Greeks exploited this with deadly efficiency, cutting off escape routes, driving wedges into the disordered ranks, and leaving the plains littered with the bodies of those who had once thought themselves invincible. Amidst this chaos, individual heroics stood out like sparks in the night. A Spartan commander led a small contingent around the flank of a disordered Persian unit, slashing through its ranks and preventing any chance of regrouping. Athenians seized abandoned Persian standards, raising them as trophies and rallying their own men to even greater acts of courage. Even the smaller city-state contingents performed with astonishing skill, exploiting gaps and isolating units that had strayed from the main mass. It was a symphony of strategy and bravery, each act of valor magnified by the surrounding collapse of the Persian force. In this moment, courage proved more decisive than numbers, and discipline became the scalpel that dissected the vast Persian horde. The terrain of Plataea further favored the Greeks during the pursuit. Streams and ridges channeled the fleeing Persians into narrow corridors, where the hoplites' coordinated thrusts became inescapable. Horses stumbled, soldiers fell into ditches, and those who tried to flee on foot were cut down by the relentless advance of the Greek infantry. The plains, which had once seemed open and advantageous to the Persian numerical superiority, became a trap, a stage upon which the Greeks could exert lethal precision. Every hillock, every stream, every ridge was exploited, turning natural features into instruments of tactical advantage. Xerxes' army, enormous in theory, was rendered helpless by its own size and the unyielding discipline of its smaller adversary. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, the scale of the Greek victory became undeniable. The once mighty Persian host was broken, its survivors fleeing in scattered groups, many pursued to their deaths. Thousands lay slain on the plains, the price of Xerxes' overconfidence and the resilience of the Greek coalition. The air hung heavy with the smell of blood, the clanging of weapons, and the cries of both victors and vanquished. For the Greeks, it was a moment of triumph unlike any before. Their unity, forged through months of preparation and years of shared threat, had withstood the greatest military power of the known world. The plains of Plataea bore witness to the extraordinary fact that courage, discipline, and cohesion could prevail against staggering numbers. Yet the victory was not only a matter of battlefield tactics, it was a symbolic moment for all of Greece. The defeat of the Persian army at Plataea marked the end of the Persian advance into Europe, a confirmation that city-states united could resist imperial ambition. Athens, Sparta, Corinth, and their allies could now return to their cities, rebuild, and celebrate not merely a tactical victory, but a vindication of the principles of freedom and independence. The names of soldiers who had fought and fallen would echo through generations, immortalized in the annals of history and in the stories of poets, chroniclers, and statesmen. Plataea became more than a battlefield. It became a testament to the power of unity, courage, and the human spirit when confronted with overwhelming odds. In the aftermath, Greek commanders moved carefully among the survivors, tending to the wounded, consolidating their positions, and ensuring that the Persian remnants could not regroup. Sparta's rigor ensured order among the victors, while Athens provided strategic oversight for the pursuit. Despite exhaustion, the Greek coalition remained disciplined, transforming what could have been a chaotic aftermath into a demonstration of strength and control. Their victory was total, not only because the Persian army was routed, but because the coalition had preserved its own unity, avoided catastrophic losses, and demonstrated the enduring efficacy of strategic preparation and cohesion. The Persian retreat stretched across the plains and back toward Boeotia, leaving a trail of devastation and corpses in its wake. Xerxes, observing from a distance, had no choice but to acknowledge the magnitude of his failure. The largest army ever assembled in the known world had been shattered by a force almost 8 times smaller, a fact that would resonate in Persia and Greece alike. For the Greek city-states, Plataea became a symbol of hope, courage, and the triumph of collective will against insurmountable odds. It was a victory that would define an era, ensuring that the ideas, freedoms, and cultures of Greece would endure, and that the shadow of Persian domination would never again loom over the Aegean world. As the dust of battle settled, the plains of Plataea lay silent, but for the moans of the wounded and the cries of those seeking the missing. The once proud Persian army had been broken and scattered, leaving the Greeks victorious, but solemn. Victory, after all, came with a cost. The hoplites, though triumphant, counted their dead and tended to the injured. Friends and comrades lay strewn across the fields, their valor immortalized in the bronze and blood that marked the battlefield. For every Persian soldier felled, there was a Greek who had given all, yet the sense of achievement was profound. Greece had endured, not just in the physical sense but in spirit and unity. The very survival of their culture, their city-states, and their ideals had been defended with courage, strategy, and an unbreakable will. The aftermath of Plataea was more than a local victory. It reshaped the geopolitical landscape of the ancient world. The Persian Empire, enormous and powerful, was forced to retreat eastward, its ambitions of European conquest thwarted. The failure at Plataea, following the disasters at Marathon, Salamis, and Thermopylae, marked the definitive end of Persia's western campaign. Xerxes' prestige, previously unquestioned, suffered irreparable damage. In Persia, whispers of the loss spread through the palaces and courts, shaking confidence in the king's infallibility. Generals and satraps, who had once believed the Greek campaign was a certainty, now faced the consequences of hubris and miscalculation. For Greece, the victory was a turning point, a moment that transformed disparate city-states into a recognized coalition capable of confronting the largest empire of the known world. The political consequences were immediate and far-reaching. Athens, buoyed by the success of Plataea and Salamis, emerged as a dominant naval power, its fleet the shield of the Aegean. Sparta, whose disciplined soldiers had formed the backbone of the phalanx, reinforced its reputation as the premier land force in Greece. Corinth, Thebes, and other city-states recognized the necessity of coordination and the concept of Greek unity, fragile though it might have been before, now gained legitimacy. Plataea demonstrated that even independent city-states with rivalries and differing governments could act together when survival demanded it. The sense of shared purpose forged during those crucial months would echo in future conflicts, reminding generations that unity could overcome even the most overwhelming force. Among the soldiers and citizens, Plataea became legend. Stories circulated of Spartan valor, of Athenians holding the center under crushing pressure, of smaller contingents performing feats of tactical brilliance that turned the tide of battle. These tales traveled through Greece, inspiring poets, chroniclers, and philosophers alike. They became part of the collective memory, a symbol of courage and strategic brilliance against impossible odds. The battle itself entered history not simply as a military engagement, but as a moral victory. A narrative of free men confronting tyranny and emerging victorious. For the Greeks, Plataea validated the idea that determination, intelligence, and disciplined action could shape the fate of nations. Yet the psychological impact on the Persian forces cannot be understated. Survivors fled with tales of the Greeks' unyielding phalanx, their cohesion in the face of overwhelming numbers, and their strategic use of terrain to neutralize advantage. The fear of facing such unity and discipline again lingered in the Persian command, altering their calculations for future campaigns. Xerxes' dream of conquering Europe had ended, leaving an empire that, while still vast and powerful, had suffered a humbling defeat at the hands of what he had once considered a minor collection of rebellious city-states. For centuries to come, historians and military leaders would study the Battle of Plataea, dissecting the tactics, the courage, and the conditions that allowed a numerically inferior force to annihilate the greatest army of its age. In the days and weeks following the battle, the Greeks took careful steps to secure the region, recover the dead, and fortify their positions. Survivors of the Persian army who could be captured were treated according to the norms of war at the time, and any attempt at regrouping or retaliation was thwarted. Greek leaders convened councils to plan the defense of remaining territories and to coordinate relief for communities devastated by the Persian campaign. The immediate threat passed, but the memory of the near annihilation served as a powerful motivator to maintain readiness and unity. Plataea was not just a battlefield, it became a blueprint for strategy, leadership, and collective resolve in the face of overwhelming odds. Over time, the legend of Plataea grew. Scholars, poets, and orators would recount the story of 38,000 Greeks standing against 300,000 Persians, of how the disciplined phalanx, combined with intelligent use of terrain and unwavering courage, reshaped history. The battlefield itself became a symbol, a reminder that no empire, however vast, could crush freedom and human will when met with resolve. This victory, alongside Thermopylae, Marathon, and Salamis, defined the narrative of the Persian Wars, framing the Greeks as defenders of liberty, civilization, and the right to govern their own fate. Generations would look back on Plataea and see not merely a battle, but a testament to the enduring power of strategy, unity, and the human spirit. Ultimately, the Battle of Plataea was more than a military engagement. It was a defining moment for an entire civilization. It demonstrated that courage and cohesion could outweigh numerical advantage, that intelligence and preparation could turn the tide of history, and that freedom, when defended with discipline and unity, could withstand even the mightiest empires. For Greece, Plataea became a story told over campfires in assemblies and in the words of historians. A reminder that the actions of a few could shape the destiny of the many, and that even the smallest coalition of determined men could triumph against overwhelming odds. The plains of Boeotia, once the scene of thunderous battle and bloodshed, became a symbol of hope, resilience, and the enduring legacy of human courage. As night fell over the plains of Plataea, the air hung heavy with the scent of blood and smoke, yet it carried also a quiet reverence. The battlefield, once alive with the roar of clashing armies, now lay in solemn stillness. Survivors of both sides wandered among the fallen, tending the wounded, collecting the dead, and absorbing the weight of what had transpired. For the Greeks, the victory was complete, yet it was tinged with the gravity of sacrifice. Thousands of lives had been given in the struggle, countless families mourning sons, brothers, and fathers. But in their hearts, there was a profound understanding. The cost had been paid, and with it, the very survival of Greece had been ensured. In the quiet aftermath, commanders moved among their troops, offering words of praise and solace. Spartan leaders, ever the embodiment of discipline and honor, commended the courage of their men, their endurance in the face of a force far larger than themselves. Athenian generals spoke of unity, of how the coalition of city-states had turned personal rivalries and local interests into a collective triumph. Even smaller contingents received recognition, their contributions immortalized in the memory of the day. It was a rare moment when the pride of individual valor and the glory of shared effort merged seamlessly. Plataea had become more than a military engagement. It was a testament to the power of solidarity, foresight, and courage in the face of overwhelming adversity. Stories of heroism spread immediately, as if the very earth itself wished to memorialize the deeds performed upon it. One tale told of a Spartan commander holding a vital hill against repeated cavalry charges, his men unyielding even as the Persians pressed relentlessly. Another recounted an Athenian contingent turning a collapsing flank into a decisive attack, cutting through disorganized Persian ranks and tipping the balance entirely. From the smaller city-states came stories of ingenuity and bravery, soldiers luring overconfident Persian units into ambushes, engineers reinforcing positions at critical moments, and messengers carrying vital intelligence across the chaos of the battlefield. These acts, large and small, became woven into the tapestry of Plataea, a narrative of courage, strategy, and the human spirit transcending fear and numbers. The Persians who survived fled eastward, carrying with them tales of the Greek phalanx, of an army whose discipline and courage transformed a hopeless struggle into decisive victory. Xerxes himself would never again command his forces on Greek soil, his ambitions curtailed, his pride humbled. For generations, the story of Plataea traveled throughout the Persian Empire as a cautionary tale, that arrogance and underestimation could undo even the mightiest. The loss redefined Persia's engagement with Greece, forcing a recalibration of strategy and diplomacy. The empire remained vast, but the shadow of Plataea loomed large, a reminder that numerical superiority could be neutralized by cohesion, courage, and the clever use of terrain. Back in Greece, the psychological impact of the battle was equally profound. The victory galvanized confidence, not only in military terms, but in civic identity and cultural pride. Athens' democracy, Sparta's disciplined militarism, and the independent character of other city-states found renewed validation. Plataea became a touchstone for the idea that freedom was worth defending, that collective effort could preserve autonomy, and that human will could shape destiny even in the face of overwhelming odds. Festivals were held, poems composed, and orators recounted the deeds of soldiers in assemblies, ensuring that Plataea became a permanent part of the Greek collective consciousness. It was not merely the defeat of an enemy, but the affirmation of values, principles, and ideals that would resonate for centuries. The battle also influenced the strategies of future generations. Military thinkers studied the phalanx, the use of terrain, and the disciplined response to numerical inferiority, extracting lessons that would echo through history. Leaders recognized that unity, coordination, and morale could outweigh sheer size, and that clever use of the environment could multiply the effectiveness of even a modest force. Plataea became more than an event. It became a case study in strategy, leadership, and the psychology of warfare. The Greek triumph was not luck, nor mere happenstance. It was a calculated, disciplined response to overwhelming odds, executed with courage and intelligence. And yet, amidst all the strategic and political consequences, the human dimension remained central. Soldiers returned to their homes as heroes, bearing the scars of battle and the weight of memory. Families mourned their losses even as they celebrated the survival of their communities. Plato, Herodotus, and later historians would recount these events, not just as a sequence of maneuvers and casualties, but as a story of men and women confronting destiny with courage and resolve. Plataea became an enduring symbol of what is possible when humanity refuses to yield to tyranny, when ordinary people, armed with courage and unity, confront the extraordinary might of empire. In the centuries that followed, the plains of Plataea were remembered as hallowed ground. Monuments were erected, inscriptions carved, and the battlefield preserved in memory and legend. The story traveled beyond Greece, inspiring poets, philosophers, and strategists across civilizations. It became a testament to the idea that the fate of nations could pivot on the determination of a few, that moral courage could equal physical strength, and that unity and purpose could overcome even the most insurmountable odds. The echoes of Plataea resonated far beyond the plains of Boeotia, leaving an indelible mark on the history of humanity. Plataea was, in every sense, more than a victory. It was a declaration. It declared that freedom could endure, that courage could triumph over tyranny, and that even the mightiest empire could be undone by disciplined unity and unshakable resolve. The Greeks had faced the impossible and prevailed, not through luck, nor through divine favor alone, but through the strength of their will, the precision of their strategy, and the courage of their hearts. And in that victory, they secured not only their own survival, but the legacy of Western civilization itself. The Battle of Plataea would forever remain a story of triumph against overwhelming odds. A story that would inspire generations to believe that even when the odds seem impossible, determination, unity, and courage can shape the course of history.